And so there's a need for this forum to be the beginning of that journey to bridge heterodox thinking, alternative thinking, with the reimagining of what mainstream thinking has been thus far. Third, and finally, just in the interest of time, there is a need for us as civil society actors, as academia, as journalists, to start also engaging in a very nuanced and subtle way with politicians. I was really struck by the politicization of the distinguished gentleman who spoke yesterday, representing from Ghana, representing the CCP, where he depoliticized the CCP away from the current problems that are currently affecting Ghana, which I thought was very intriguing and curious. But there's a political animal that has been triggered in the way they presented that, the way he presented his argument to remove the political aspect from the current crisis. And I think we need to bring that back. I don't think it is appropriate or correct to some extent to sort of absolve our political discourse, whether you are in government or not, from the crises that is affecting the continent. Because when you do have regime change, you are confronted with those realities, with the debt crisis, with illicit financial flows, with the political economy challenges that are at the international level. So I think as we begin this conversation to bridge the young intellectual curiosity from the university, as we bridge the academic literature and thinking with policy-making processes, and we link the political dimension of not absolving ourselves because we are not in government. And I think also Suad mentioned this, that you don't then find yourself in a little cabal doing certain things. We are then, really going to truly coordinate and be together as one continent, as it was envisaged, in the early days of the very first liberation from colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So 3 things. 1 is the beginning, not the end. 2, there's a demographic interface there we need to navigate. And 3, we need to build on our engagement with the political class and ensure that we are tabling concrete proposals. Let me bring in Honorable Moses Asaga. And as a former deputy minister in Ghana, many times we are told the challenge we have in this continent in particular is that we have fantastic proposals. Even in policy documents, implementation becomes a challenge. How large a problem is that, and how can we begin to take the very good proposals from here into concrete policy action?
Thank you very much, moderator. Like you rightly said, I've been in politics, first a technocrat, a politician, an opposition person. So I have seen it all. And first, I need to commend the organizers of this program. I think in the last 4 years, I haven't seen such a thing happening in Ghana. And these have brought all the experts that we can think of, top economists, policy makers, you name them. I think this conference to me was a real eye-opener. And I was also happy that you had the young scholars meeting, because sometimes some of us stay too long without grooming anybody to take our places. And I think the young scholars meeting would bridge that gap. Now, I can also say that as a former legislator, I think that Parliament should be engaged such that in such kinds of conferences, we have to bring some of our members of Parliament. This is because at the end of the day, they are those who are going to set the laws. Even if it comes to the IMF and World Bank, you name them, at the end of the day, those loan agreements go to Parliament for approval. So if they are not well in tune with some of the discussions that we had here, it will be a difficult situation. And they are representing us. And so if they make errors in some of the agreements and the negotiations, the multinationals are coming back to say, oh, but it is your parliament that approved it. So why do you blame us? And that is why I think parliamentary recognition for such conferences should be put on a high level. Having said that, and me as a former Deputy Minister of Finance, I have seen that the narrative has changed a lot, and we need to be abreast with current issues. For example, I was in Parliament when most of the big mining companies came to Ghana, and then we had to approve their agreements. One silly agreement, which I championed because I was the chairman for Energy and Mines, was to give them a liberal stability agreement. And in that stability agreement, instead of making it, let's say, 2 or 3 years, it was like for 10 years. So even when situations change for them, and you wanted them to claw back part of their profits into the domestic system, they will tell you, no, we have a stability agreement. So for me, going into the next policy position, I have to look at all these stability agreements that were signed in the extractive industry. Not to be commending only Jomo, but Jomo today made a point that we are so enthused with being with the city in London, Washington, and you name it. And therefore, we must be very critical with our finance ministers. And here, without any biases, the current situation that we have in Ghana and the fact that Eurobond as an external borrowing have become the champion is because of what Jomo mentioned. Because if you have an investment banker as your minister of finance, and there's this much liquidity in the system, of course, the person would do what he knows best. And that is why Ghana, we are where we are. So that Jomo's caution is very, very important. So these are my few remarks to start with.
Thank you, Honorable Moses, and we appreciate assuming responsibility for part of the challenges we have today. So we need to involve the legislature and parliament a lot more in our engagements like this one, because finally they have to be part of this conversation and they pass the laws in our countries. Your Excellency, Aminata Dramane, having listened to our deliberations over the last 3 days, how do we take this forward in a meaningful way to ordinary citizens?
C'est un énorme défi. Quand je sors de cette salle, mais pas que, quand dans mon propre pays, je vois l'état réel des lieux, l'immense majorité de nos concitoyens fonctionnent dans un système économique dont le lien avec ce qui est débattu ici n'est pas suffisamment clair pour être pris en compte à la fois dans les processus de transformation économique, tout comme dans les processus de démocratisation de nos pays. Nous proposons d'organiser à Bamako avec Heidi, dont le thème sera la fibre africaine. La fibre africaine en prenant le coton comme matière témoin. Les pays sahéliens qui sont disons, confrontés à cette crise sans précédent sont des pays cotonniers, producteurs de coton. mais qui sont des pays appauvris du fait de la nature du marché dans ce secteur. Mais ce que je vois et qui me navre le plus, c'est que dans nos pays où on ne crée pas d'emploi pour la jeunesse et où la question migratoire devient un défi politique colossal, quand je regarde ces acteurs sociaux, économiques, qu'est-ce qu'ils vendent? Quelle est la réalité de nos économies et dans laquelle nous avons envie d'injecter des ressources? Moi, je ne vois que, y compris au niveau de la CEDEAO, en fait, nous travaillons pour les autres. Nous travaillons pour les autres. Faute d'avoir pu industrialiser, faute d'industrie véritablement africaine, moi, je crois que nos opérateurs économiques travaillent dans le sens d'intérêts qui n'ont rien à voir avec les besoins réels des hommes et des femmes que nous voyons aujourd'hui. Ma préoccupation, c'est, quand je dis le coton en tant que fibre, c'est parce que fibre est de la résistance que l'on constate aujourd'hui à travers le continent. Il y a une volonté de la part des gens ordinaires de résister à ce système, mais ils n'ont pas une bonne connaissance de ce système de manière à l'inscrire dans le champ politique et de manière à défier les acteurs politiques qui veulent qu'on leur confie le pouvoir. Donc, moi, je prends cet exemple, me préoccupe en tant qu'ancienne ministre de la Culture, mais aussi parce que les sciences sociales, c'est mon champ d'investigation et d'action. Ce que je vois et qui est déjà explosif et qui promet de l'être davantage, c'est que l'Afrique est devenue, non, elle est déjà source d'approvisionnement des nations riches en matière à ressources stratégiques, mais déversoir des déchets. Les déchets textiles, les friperies, les second hand dans tous les domaines aujourd'hui constituent l'essentiel des transactions entre les gens ordinaires. L'élite n'est pas concernée, mais ceux qui ont un pouvoir d'achat, ceux au nom de qui nous parlons ici, sont obligés de s'investir dans le recyclage des restes des autres. Et parmi ces restes-là, il y a énormément de textiles. Pourquoi il n'y a pas de textiles africains? Quand je regarde, je ne vois pas dans nos salles ce que nous portons, l'immense majorité, même quand nous pensons que c'est africain, ce n'est pas africain, c'est à la couleur, des couleurs de l'Afrique, mais ce n'est jamais produit en Afrique. Ça, on le sait, et ça, c'est une véritable ruine. Et c'est, disons, la guerre économique s'inscrit sur ce terrain. Et bien entendu, qui finance, qui achète, qui rembourse. Bon, je crois que c'est extrêmement important de confronter tout ce qui a été dit ici avec la réalité du terrain, qui est à peu de choses près les mêmes ici au Ghana, qu'au Mali et dans d'autres pays africains.
Thank you. So sorry, the sound needs some adjustment there. We're told that the outfits we have look African, but they are not African. Very good point there, Your Excellency. Thank you so much. So my next two speakers, I'll ask them the same question because they serve pretty much in the same capacities. Let me start with Dr. Mahama, Technical Advisor to the Vice President's Office in Ghana. We've been told we need to involve the legislature and parliamentarians in sessions like this one, and that's very important. How do we get executive buy-in? Because remember, that's the other critical arm of government. How do we get executive buy-in for some of the proposals and ideas we have here? Oh, sorry, pass the microphone. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I will indulge you to pick this question from three perspectives. First, to posit this question in the whole discussion spanning these 3 days we've had. Debt, as discussed today, seems to me like a fetter to development. But far from it, we finance development by the creation of debt. So it is both a development imperative and also a fetter on development if you do not chart an optimal path of debt accumulation. And I think that this discussion today is very appropriate at a time that almost 2/3 of African countries are debt distressed. In other words, over 25 countries in Africa have debt levels which are unsustainable. And to chart that particular optimal path, I think that we need bold solutions which require a redefinition of the problem of Africa. And I've heard over the days people talk about development states. I've heard today a discussion about the theoretical frameworks of our development. All those narratives fit into the bigger problem of the redefinition of the African problem. And my proposal, my suggestion is that we will need a hybrid system of development that reflects the African context and also borrow appropriate best practice elsewhere. But on the way forward, the key is to maintain macroeconomic stability. That's the key. As economists here, you cannot maintain macroeconomic stability if you have a your fiscals are imbalanced. You cannot maintain macro stability if inflation is skyrocketing. You cannot maintain macro stability if exchange rate is depreciating. But in Africa, our vehicle currency is the United States dollar. How do we wean ourselves of this dependency on a single most important and universally acceptable currency, the United States dollar? To the extent that we continue and we do transaction and we go back to depend on the dollar, our economic architecture will be dependent on what happens in the United States. So how do we wean ourselves of this dependence? And I think that the initiative of an African currency or the initiative to have the ECO or the initiative to have a common currency for the African zone should be one of the starting points. Because when you borrow in dollar-denominated terms, even without accumulating the depreciation of your currency at your desktop, without doing anything, exchange rate depreciation alone contributed to over 20 billion accumulation to Ghana debt stocks. This is something that government did not even borrow any, by the mere depreciation of your currency. So this is something we need to look at. And on the physical part, on the legislative, I think my uncle, Mr. Moses Asaga, rightly mentioned, what I have not heard more over the past 3 days is the legal framework for the accumulation of debt. We've not discussed that thoroughly. And I think that we need to approach that discussion. In Ghana, the current government instituted what we call the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The Fiscal Responsibility Act was to, among other things, cap our fiscal deficit for every succeeding year to 5% of GDP. But this very brilliant law was thrown to the dogs on the back of COVID. Government had to suspend this very important responsibility. But how do we do it? I think we need to revisit that. We need to fall. African countries must begin, if you like, setting the optimal fiscal target. Do not let your expenditure for the preceding year be more than 100 plus that particular percentage. We have to look at fiscal responsibility from the expenditure perspective because revenue handle seems not to be working. While revenue is not working, then we must look at expenditure. But we must also run the fine line between development, investing in the right sector, and also curtailing, if you like, expenditure. So I think fiscal responsibility, and I must note that the Vice President moving forward has promised the people of Ghana that as part of the amendment to the Fiscal Responsibility Act, we intend to make sure that government budgeted expenses do not go beyond 105% of the previous year's expenditure. In other words, we are putting a fetter on government expenditure.
we need to also look at the revenue collection regime in Africa. It seems that we are burdening some few people with taxation to the detriment of many people, largely because our economy is informal. How do we rope in the informal sector to pay appropriate taxes? This has to do with the digitization of systems, with the simplification of our tax system, because me, as even a dedicated person, I find it difficult to even calculate my own tax. I mean, how do we make such a system so complicated for the people to even follow? And you know, man, your tax avoidance is legal. It is tax evasion that is illegal. So a brilliant man will find a way to avoid tax because you are manipulating the rules, you are manipulating the laws to your advantage, which is purely legal. So I think that we need to simplify our tax system. The other thing I would propose is that we need to address cost of living hands-on, which is also one of the macroeconomic indicators. Cost of living in Africa. And cost of living in Africa has fed into what we call the African premium. Earlier on today, someone was talking about how do we, define an African credit system. In fact, he was talking of addressing an African problem. How do we have a credit rating? Moody, Fitch, S&P would come with the parameters of how we should assess our credit worthiness or otherwise. How do we have a credit system in Africa that reflects our system? And that would feed into addressing the cost of living in Africa, because borrowing at a very exorbitant rate all have dynamics in how your macroeconomic architecture is built. For us in Ghana, we have identified the problem. The problem to high cost of living is one, we have high rent, food prices, we also have transportation. These are the three major drivers of inflation or cost of living in Africa. We need to tackle this, and this one will have to go with the real sector productivity. Once you produce, you address issue of food prices. And let me even note, on the back of COVID, most North African countries are experiencing food crisis, are experiencing, if you like, high food prices. How do we insulate ourselves from these particulars? And lastly, the last point I want to note is the issue of the paradox of the plenty in Africa. The paradox of the plenty. We seem to have all the resources, yet we are the poorest amongst the regions. What is this that we are doing so wrong? In Ghana, we have about 5 billion ounces of gold reserves. This, according to the Ghana Geological Service Department, about 43,000 kilometers or square of land contains gold reserves. Of this, 50%, which is about 21,000 kilometers square, is unexplored. When you translate this to the numbers, it means that we have about 10 trillion worth of resources sitting down, yet we are poor. We went to the IMF for only $3 billion. And you have 10 trillion United States dollars under the soil, buried. How do we use these resources to our advantage? And I think that that is the angle African countries with the abundance of natural resources, lithium, bauxite, gold, we should be seeing how do we exploit these resources sustainably to the benefit of the Ghanaian and to the African people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahama, for your strong sentiments there. I'll be coming back to you on the issue of a unified currency for the region. But before that, let me cross over to Dr. Chérif to give us his introductory thoughts on how do we take this forward in a manner that can be implementable to all of us.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le modérateur. Je voudrais d'abord remercier Ndongo et son équipe, et d'ailleurs toute l'IDEAS, l'organisation, de nous avoir associés à ces travaux très intéressants. Je pense que, comme d'habitude, nous avons eu beaucoup de présentations sur les considérations techniques, les modèles, technique, monétaire, financière, etc. Mais la dernière présentation de ce matin est venue compléter vraiment ce travail intéressant en s'attaquant à l'histoire. Comment sommes-nous devenus endettés de cette façon-là? Pourquoi la dette extérieure est-elle si importante? Je crois que c'est important de le dire. La belle présentation de ce matin a insisté sur la dimension théorique et idéologique de cette question. C'est voulu, c'est organisé. Il n'est pas exact de dire que les pays se sont levés souverainement pour emprunter. Et c'est cet aspect de l'histoire que je vais essayer de compléter pour qu'on comprenne un peu plus avant d'arriver aux conclusions que je tire. Et je le dis d'emblée, qui tournent autour de la coopération sud-sud. Notre première raté, je l'appelle comme ça, le petit échec, je crois, est parti de la conférence de Bandung. Bandung était un moment d'espoir, un moment très, très intéressant. Et malheureusement, à cause de quelques blocages, refus de discuter de certaines questions, et on ne peut considérer qu'une chose, que Bandung a été une victoire politique. L'aspect économique n'ayant pas été discuté, Rostov, qui a repris les travaux de Nourske, Ragnar, s'est engouffré en faisant là-bas la présentation d'un article qu'il avait construit. Les étapes de la croissance économique, c'est ça le titre. Et cette idée des étapes de la croissance économique nous a gouvernés jusqu'à très récemment. Qu'est-ce que cela veut dire? C'est-à-dire que c'est depuis là qu'on a considéré que le développement, c'est une graine qui a poussé chez les pays riches, qu'il suffit aux pays du Sud de prendre et d'arroser, de semer et d'arroser dans leur territoire pour avoir les mêmes résultats. Sur cette méthode, Schumpeter a déjà dit ce qu'il en pensait. Les mêmes effets ne produisent jamais les mêmes causes. Il y a eu un autre coup de force. Après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale et la mise en place du plan Marshall. Les États-Unis se sont retrouvés comme étant la première puissance mondiale pour 4 raisons fondamentalement. La première, c'est que la mise à terre de la bourse de Londres par la bourse de New York. New York, deuxièmement, est devenue la place financière la plus importante. Et les 2/3 des stocks d'or au monde se trouvaient sur le territoire des États-Unis. Et enfin, les analyses des Américains ont montré que cette puissance venait du libre-échange avec l'euro. C'est pour ça d'ailleurs que le plan Marshall est intervenu, qui n'est pas du tout un cadeau. C'était pour remettre sur pied les entreprises et revigorer la classe ouvrière afin d'en tirer plus d'avantages. Mais le 6 juin 1946, au large de la Normandie, s'est tenue une réunion quasi secrète entre les Américains et tous les anciens colonisateurs. Cette réunion n'était pas une réunion sympathique. C'est ce que je peux considérer comme un avenant du plan Marshall. C'était l'injonction américaine pour la libération immédiate des colonies. Vous le savez, les colonies n'ont pas attendu. Tout le XXe siècle a été un moment de résistance nègre. Les mouvements panafricains les plus importants se sont situés à ce moment-là, avec des radios, des journaux, etc. Et donc, le président américain s'est dit que comment le faire, c'est McNamara Robert qui a donné la réponse. Il y a une crise de surliquidité, il faut les endetter par la force. C'est ça. L'endettement, il est forcé, il faut le reconnaître. Et justement, cet endettement forcé, alors que des pays n'en avaient pas besoin, le Sénégal, par exemple, sur la période, était suffisamment liquide au point d'annuler à 2 reprises la dette de tout le monde rural. Mais cet endettement forcé a produit du gaspillage partout. Et ce gaspillage a donné naissance à l'ajustement structurel. C'est là où il faut comprendre que la dette est un instrument de pénétration de nos économies pour y gouverner dans l'intérêt des pays développés. L'ajustement structurel, là, ils ont pénétré les pays. Finalement, on peut considérer qu'il y a eu un échec relatif de l'ajustement structurel. Et le seul partenaire qui réellement en a tiré suffisamment de leçons, à mon avis, c'est la Banque mondiale. Dans tous ces travaux, la Banque mondiale fait de plus en plus des réflexions pour tenir en compte des besoins de la population africaine et ailleurs. Ça, c'est une donnée qu'on ne peut pas discuter. La Banque mondiale intervient moins sur la politique gouvernementale, etc. Le FMI, lui, reste droit dans ses bottes et les autres dégâts viennent des autres partenaires au développement. Voilà des aspects qu'il faut considérer. Le consensus de Washington a prolongé le travail à travers les politiques de libéralisation qu'on peut résumer en 3 points. Le décloisonnement, dont l'objectif était la mise en compétition des économies qui n'avaient pas la même histoire, la même trajectoire et les mêmes capacités d'économie d'échelle. La désintermédiation, c'est le deuxième point. Il fallait que les pays du Sud, les gouvernements, ne portent plus des opérateurs économiques pour en faire justement des leviers de développement. Le troisième point, c'est l'ouverture de toutes les frontières, je l'ai dit. Et tout ce travail-là a donné comme résultat, particulièrement sur le continent africain, l'apparition d'États faillis, d'États mous, d'États vulnérables et de non-États. Et tout ce que nous demandons aujourd'hui, c'est à ce type d'État que nous demandons. Je vais m'arrêter là pour dire que devant une telle situation, il faut fondamentalement une alternative qui se situera dans une démarche de desserrement de l'étau de la contrainte extérieure et inscrit dans la souveraineté populaire. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, sir, with a very powerful historical reflection there. I was tempted to go to my second round of questions, but I'm seeing time is running. Do we have any questions from the floor on the question of policy and how we take this forward? I can see a hand right at the back, so please, we know the drill. Shoot up your hand, introduce yourself, and ask a straight question. Don't set the context, please.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Emmanuel Otu. Hello, I hope you can hear me, please.
Yes, now.
Good afternoon. My name is Emmanuel Otu. I'm from Ghana National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And I've been following the discussion from Wednesday up to now. And we from the private sector, private businesses, and I mean the business community, look like the discussion we got missing at the points, or we've been missing throughout. And I wanted to know where do we lie, because when there is too much debt, we tend to suffer through borrowing. And when there is too much taxes, we tend to suffer through high cost of production. And this is what we are facing. But then we want to clear this debt, and then we are missing out of the discussion. We did not contribute to it, but we are suffering. I want to know what we can do, or what our role is in helping to solve this. The next thing has to do with
the last one, Emmanuel.
Okay, the last one is infrastructure. Some of these costs are contracted based on infrastructure provisions. And some of these infrastructure, we can look at how we can price them, because some of these things we can price and let them contribute directly to the repayment of the debt through which we incur. But then we are not doing so. I think my thinking is that perhaps it is time for us to start suggesting tools that we can use to price some of these benefits we get from this infrastructure so that it can contribute directly to this payment. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. 2 questions there. 1, private sector is in the dilemma of debt and taxes. 2, infrastructure and the ROI and how it goes to servicing debt. Yes, let's take the question here.
Thank you very much. My name is Bismarck Aduba. If you look at the minerals and mining policies and laws of this country, they promote the interest of the investor than that of the Ghanaian, particularly our communities that have these resources. And over the years, I had an opportunity to chance a document from Bank of Ghana that indicated that we are benefiting less than 10% of the resources. Doctor talked about the deposits that are still here, valued at trillions or millions of dollars. are we suggesting that we do a radical legal reform where we'll put aside these minerals and mining laws that promote the interests of the investor? Or what is the alternative that can be done to change the narrative and rewrite the story in a way that will promote the Ghanaian interests?
Thank you. We've taken from this side. Let's come here.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Mauto. Cocoa is the backbone of the economy, and the government fetches a lot from that. Monitor the media, you can find out that the sector is really struggling. Hello? In order to avoid going out for this loan, which has favorable effect on the economy, there is the need to look at this sector. This sector is facing a serious challenge, the smuggling of the cocoa and the issue of galamsey. During the election, there were a time that Rotarians were perceived to be Togolese, and the military were all over preventing people from moving in and out. Today, there are smugglers moving the cocoa in and out. I want to find out from Dr. Haruna what measure the government is putting in place to fight against galamsey and the issue of the smuggling of the cocoa, and consider the price of cocoa as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Allow us to take those questions. We are coming back for another round of questions. So the first one is private sector. Where is the place of the private sector? Too much taxes on one hand, borrowing on the other. Who will take that? Jason, you want to go for it?
I can hazard. A lot of them were very Ghana specific, but I think let's begin by distinguishing what we mean by private sector. There is, of course, international private sector where the tax structure is very different that a government employs in order to attract foreign private investment into the economy. And I think the gentleman who asked the question is more about the domestic tax structure that actually crowds out domestic private investment. And I think that's a tension that this forum over the last 5 days has tried to address. The more inward-looking incentive structure that can stimulate domestic production, that can stimulate domestic demand, rather than us looking outwardly and then sort of reorienting the structure of the economy. I think the other thing, just to pick up on one of the points around the legal framework and the legal aspects that we need to look at domestic level, I think it's a relatively simple thing to do. Is just to say, if this is a bad deal, we're not going to do it, and just put it in a law. And I'll illustrate this with an example so that I'm not coming across as being too simplistic. The US has introduced an Inflation Reduction Act. The European Union has introduced the carbon-based access market legislation or policy. These are essentially protectionist policies to look after their own interests that have been adopted by the US and then all the EU member states. And what it does essentially is keep out products that are coming from outside the EU zone that have been manufactured in a particular way or using certain types of emissions. So there's nothing that stops us as a continent, as national policymakers, from looking at the laws and just say, we're not going to accept this kind of debt contract. We're not going to allow this type of investment from happening because it goes against our laws. I think the second one is understanding that the debt or the legal architecture around debt does not work in isolation, neither do the institutions. We have had dotted across the continent very good cases where the judiciaries have played a very fundamental role in interpreting constitutions, interpreting public financial management acts and other debt laws. So strengthening other arms of the governance structure in our systems is something that is relatively easy to do. I think it just requires the political will and the political incentives for us to do that. Zimbabwe, Zambia, Kenya, Uganda, Mozambique are just a few examples where the courts and strategic litigation has been used to embody and empower the court system to hold government to account for the actions with regard to fiscal responsibility. So I think it's on the legal side, it's relatively simple to do if you just enact the laws, if you just encourage other institutions. In Kenya, where I come from, the Auditor General's office, together with the Debt Management Office, has been, over the last few months, really trying to question how borrowing has been done in Kenya, and coming and asking very difficult questions of the executive, of parliament. And you can start seeing where the loopholes are that have allowed government to misuse the law. But if you can then bring those laws that are as recommendations to tighten, I think that's something that we can do. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And by the way, in Kenya, the Controller of Budget recently kicked up a storm by saying funding from the IMF and World Bank are not concessional anyway. And she was raising questions about the pricing, which was really a debate. Let me come to Dr. Mahama. There was a question on cocoa, which I would like you to respond to briefly.
All right, thank you very much. And before I briefly also attend to that, let me just correct the notion that the Chamber of Commerce contributes no to the problem. As a matter of fact, economic system is very, very much interrelated. The very fact that importers import, which is of course demand-driven, put pressure on your currency. So I think that what you can do is also more or less reorienting yourself towards import substitution. How do we make sure that some of the things we import, running from toothpicks to the skin of animals, how do we ensure that we look at domestic replacement of these import products? When you do that, you contribute to the stability of the economy. And I think that it is not a problem you do not contribute to. I mean, it's all of us are part of that problem, and we shouldn't seek to exonerate ourselves. Let's have that mindset. It will help us in solving the problem. On the issue of cocoa pricing, you see, I don't know if I say this, I'll still have my job by the time I leave here. But for the benefit of the intellectual academic freedom or privileges and immunities, I think that I can say that. You see, our pricing formula for cocoa in Ghana is not sustainable. And I have said it on a number of times, because it's driven by the politics. How do we have prices paid to farmers, which is more than or equivalent to the international price of cocoa? When Cocoa Board has to, do operational costs, why will cocoa and Cocoa Board, for that matter, run into debt when we know that cocoa is a global and a very important product with high demand? Because we so much involved in the politics, paying at premiums that we should not be. And also, you talk of smuggling. Smuggling is not a social phenomenon, it's an economic problem, because there's maximum of economies, supply creates its own demand. While people feel like they can get good prices in Côte d'Ivoire, they will smuggle their products to that place. Why is it that the Ivorian system is so liberalized, with farmers having complete autonomy and farming cocoa just like we are farming maize? But in the case of Ghana, it is regulated, price determined, and everyone has to sell to the government. I mean, these are the frameworks we need to look at in order to get the cocoa sector very, very, very solid. And I think that until we do that, we will have a problem with the cocoa pricing and how it can contribute. Of course, government always play the role of cocoa cross-pollination to ensure that farmers have their yield increase. Government ensure that we support cocoa farmers with extensive service to ensure that we have increase in yield. All this, but we must get the economics of the cocoa farming right. Once that rural economic issue of cocoa farming is not addressed appropriately, we will still have ourselves to blame in terms of that. And also on Galamsey, someone asked if I can quickly address that. You see, Galamsey is a livelihood issue. At the same time, an environmental issue. And for the benefits of those of you who are not Ghanaians, Galamsey simply means illegal mining of resources. That is the Ghanaian model. It has gained international prominence, but it means that illegal mining of natural resources, i.e. gold, forest, or bauxite, and what have you. Now, we should be looking at emulating the South African example, where small artisanal gold miners or resource miners should be regularized and monitored, where the least distraction to the environment is encouraged, so that we encourage more people to go into mining. Because as I mentioned, several billions of gold reserves are buried under the ground, yet people are suffering. How do we regularize it and ensure that people can go into sustainable mining should be the focus. And I think that the community mining scheme introduced by the government is one of the ways of addressing this issue. But it is something that we can still open up for discussion to ensuring that the systems work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahama. Honorable Asaga, you wanted to come in briefly on the question of the extractives industry favoring multinationals more than locals.
Thank you. I think Doctor has done a good job in some of his answers. And I just wanted to mention something he forgot. Yes, he did mention that the pricing for farmers for cocoa being politicized is the bane of what is distorting the price of cocoa. And in Ghana, we call it producer price. And what he said was right, and I don't think he can go back to his office. Because every new government wants to please the cocoa farmers just because of electoral vote. So when they come and they have really nothing to change, the only place to go is, even if he can add 5%, he can say, compare me to the previous government. So I think we need to depoliticize the cocoa pricing. Now, regarding the mining sector, the extractive, where a colleague said that the communities benefit and the rest, I agree with him in entirety. You know, Ghana, we've been mining maybe for the last 100 years. But during the colonial time, what was the mining laws that we had? The mining laws were dominated by the colonial master. They were the people who gave us what we must do. So if you take a town like Takwa, you go there and you are so sorry that that Takwa, which has maybe the third or second largest mining company in Africa, should be looking the way it is without better infrastructure. But I blame it on the colonial laws. But coming to the new narrative, and I would want to assist my colleague who asked the questions. In the recent 5 years till today, the narrative is changing because the Minerals Commission, which did not exist when Takwa was in its high pedestal of producing cocoa, has come out with certain laws that would protect the community. So, for example, in Ghana, Doctor talked of community mining. There are two types of mining. We have deep mining and alluvial mining. The communities normally target alluvial mining, and that is where the distraction is. Now, when you come to the deep mining, and the other methodology, which is a bit sophisticated with high technology, you can only bring in the multinationals because those are capital intensive. So what have we now done in the new narrative? That is where the word corporate social responsibility. So when you are given a concession, before even you start bringing in equipment, after your exploration activities, you must prove to the community what is your corporate social responsibility to that community. And I am from the north, where we now have new mines being discovered. And I can speak on authority, and I can take my friend to that place that the corporate social responsibility, it is being implemented. That is number one. The next is about local content when it comes to the multinationals. And that is where our government and also our parliament should bite hard to make sure that 70% to 80% of services are given to the local people. And I can again testify that if you go to the north, a company, an indigenous company called Planners and Engineers, they have won the contract for the services engineering. And that alone can constitute about 30% of the revenue generation. So
thank you, sir. Thank you.
We are doing our best. And I think with the new narrative and what is happening in the north, I think we'll go far. Let me just give the example very well so that you appreciate it.
In a minute.
My son came from Cologne University, and I took him to the village. When he saw the school that has been built, he asked me, "Daddy, is this in South Africa, in Cape Town?" Because the school was just fantastic.
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, I have to hold him there because we want to take more questions from the floor. Let's come to this side of the room now. There's a hand right at the front here and 3 at the back there. So where's the microphone? Introduce yourself and let's keep our questions brief.
My name is Isaac Adongo. I'm a member of parliament. I feel very disappointed because this is the capstone of all the 3 days that we'll be here. We are very clear of what took us to this point, but we are not sure how we are getting out of it. And the time allocated to a conversation such as this is disappointing. We are not discussing anything that will solve the problem. With the 1 hour or 1 hour, half hours that is allocated to this. I'm a member of parliament and I sit here and you talk a lot about legislation, but you know that policymakers are the ones who bring us the bills. We don't generate bills in parliament. So if you go and negotiate for over 3 years and you come and put an agreement before me and you want me to approve it in 3 days, tell me what magic I can perform. And our laws are quite clear. You can't generate laws from parliament, even on private members' bill, that impose fiscal costs on the state. And yet, we have not involved the right stakeholders to discuss this matter. As we are now, you have said time is well spent. So why did we come here in the first place? If we cannot give ourselves enough time to discuss the policy options that we'll get out of here, are we just here to do a talk show? I think that we must be willing to do the work and stay here till late, if only that will give us the solution. And I feel very disappointed to be part of this meeting.
The legislator is raising the issue of involvement of parliament and the time we have allocated for the policy options.
Yes, and thank you very much. I would like to really thank IDEA for having the policy session as a closing questions. And I would like to put a few things to the panel for considerations. The first, in our view, is really the sense of urgency. And how do we ensure that our policymakers, our politicians, policymakers have a sense of urgency? In essence, to illustrate that, when you are the last person in a race, you have to run faster than others to catch up if you are to win. We do not see that sense of urgency. Second thing, to further illustrate that, one issue which came out throughout the 3 days was the deficit of industrializations. It was a driver of external liabilities through the import channel. And we have, under the AFCFTA, a provision for the rules of origin, which is something all African leaders should have rushed to make sure we have it immediately. It's been labeled as a passport for industrializations. How come the sense of urgency is not pushing us to deliver on this so that we can begin to see the development of regional value chains across the continent to reduce that import dependency? And then related to that, how do we actually industrialize without generating enough power at scale and affordable to actually be competitive enough? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Let me take the question here, right here at the front, please, so that we respond to the issues raised.
Merci beaucoup. Oui, non, mais on regarde toujours un peu à droite dans la salle, donc c'est mieux de s'asseoir toujours à droite peut-être. Cette conférence semble appeler à ce qu'on soit un peu plus solidaire et unis, parce qu'on a l'impression qu'au niveau national comme au niveau continental, il y a des défis énormes à surmonter et la solidarité s'impose. Donc, dans le contexte de l'Union africaine, il y a quand même un enjeu important. Je ne sais pas s'il y a des Guinéens dans la salle. On est quand même en Afrique de l'Ouest. J'ai vu qu'il y a des Maliens, mais est-ce qu'il y a un Guinéen au moins dans la salle? C'est pas grave. S'il y a des journalistes francophones de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, s'il vous plaît, portez le message, parce qu'il y a quand même un enjeu qui concerne la République de la Guinée. Ce pays, qui est un gouvernement, que les présidents soient en uniforme ou pas n'est pas mon problème, fait face à des obstacles comme d'autres pays, n'est-ce pas, dans leur collaboration avec l'Union africaine. Ils sont suspendus, ils ne peuvent pas venir, donc ils ne peuvent pas travailler dans ce contexte-là. Mais c'est un pays qui a pris un engagement très, très important à l'UA des années avant la pandémie. Et donc, vraiment, je voudrais, et cet engagement revient maintenant au président Mamadi Doumbouya. S'il nous entend, il se doit d'honorer cet engagement en tant que chef exécutif conformément à la constitution guinéenne. Il incombe donc au président Doumbouya aujourd'hui de contribuer activement, toujours, que son gouvernement participe aux travaux de l'Union africaine ou pas, de participer activement et de continuer à contribuer aux bénéfices des Africains en facilitant notamment la mise en place du Centre africain du développement minier à Conakry. C'est une décision qui a été obtenue. Il y a eu énormément de travail et de débats. Ça a été conclu. Ils doivent s'acquitter de cette tâche. C'est très, très important parce que la mise en place de la vision minière africaine dépend de l'existence de ce centre et dépend d'un centre qui soit, et il faut qu'il le soit et existe, et à Conakry. Il ne faut pas que ça continue à être un petit centre qui est dans une section d'une division de l'Union africaine où les employés qui sont au nombre de 3 sont payés à partir de PNUD bonnes. Ce n'est pas acceptable. Maintenant, nous sommes une coalition, la coalition pour le dialogue en Afrique, une coalition d'institutions et d'individus. Nous nous engageons. Et j'espère que, je ne sais pas si Yao Graham est dans la salle. Bon, je vois que M. Chérif est à l'avant. Third World Network, Third World Net Forum, Ideas et CODA, on s'engage à accompagner le gouvernement de la Guinée à faire un travail panafricain dont ils doivent s'acquitter. C'est très, très important et c'est maintenant qu'il faut que ça se fasse. On ne peut pas continuer à attendre que le centre qui est censé se concentrer sur la recherche politique en question de politique minière et le plaidoyer politique ne voit pas le jour. C'est problématique dans un pays où, sous sa présidence, ils ont quand même lancé le plus grand projet d'infrastructure minière du continent. Le projet Simandou a vu le jour sous le président Doumbia. Il faudrait qu'il continue et qu'il fasse le reste au bénéfice des Africains. Et nous nous engageons non seulement à accompagner, mais à superviser et préférablement contrôler toutes les étapes de ce projet qui est un panafricain et très important. C'est juste un appel. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Allow us to respond to the issues raised so that we come back to the next. The issue of unity and solidarity, Dr. Chérif, you could help me get some comments on that. There's a question around the sense of urgency with which we are undertaking these reforms. And then there's the issue of the role of the legislature and that they should have been key stakeholders in this discussion. So let me start with you, sir.
Je voudrais d'abord remercier Son Excellence, Monsieur le parlementaire. C'est les mêmes réactions souvent dans nos pays. Je vous félicite et je vous remercie d'être souvent en colère comme ça. C'est une bonne chose, ça permet d'avancer. Ça se passe aussi comme ça chez nous. Mais il ne faut pas perdre de vue que l'on soit dans la société civile, à l'université ou ailleurs, ou même comme je l'ai été, d'autres l'ont été, un conseiller technique du gouvernement ou du président de la République réfléchit pour l'action, mais n'a pas la décision entre ses mains. Et notre travail, nous le faisons. On peut le vérifier et on peut le voir. Parce que c'est normal que le gouvernement fasse ses arbitrages. Nous le savons, quand un chef d'État a 600 conseillers au palais, il en a 1200 à l'extérieur. Et il décide sur des considérations que nous ne maîtrisons pas. J'en discutais régulièrement avec les deux présidents que j'ai servi directement au cabinet. Mais je partage votre colère. Je crois que l'intérêt de notre discussion, c'est d'expliquer pourquoi. C'est ça. L'objectif d'un scientifique ou d'un chercheur, ce n'est pas de dire la vérité, mais d'aider à comprendre d'abord. Et je crois que nous sommes dans cette ligne. Je voudrais dire, monsieur le modérateur, simplement que, tout en acceptant encore une fois cette colère, que nos contributions, en tout cas celles que nous venons de faire, celles que je viens de faire, ne sont pas pour gommer les efforts qui sont faits dans le gouvernement pour des pays où le colonisateur, en plus de 200 ans, n'a absolument rien fait. Au contraire, en continuant à la dégradation des territoires. Je donne des exemples. Le Sénégal, il n'y a pas de doute. Tous ceux qui y viennent voient ce qui se fait. Au Kenya, vous y allez, c'est pareil. Nos pays sont en train progressivement d'être formatés réellement. Le seul regret qu'on peut avoir, Ndongo l'a dit, vous réfléchissez, vous vous rendez compte que l'essentiel de l'investissement qui est fait est un formatage pour que le capital étranger puisse s'y répandre. C'est une vérité, on ne peut pas le nier, c'est ça la réalité. Le Sénégal, jusqu'en l'an 2005, n'avait que 2 universités. La première datait de 1956, oui. Et aujourd'hui, nous en avons quand même une 12aine en place. Maintenant, sur le PIB, le revenu réel par tête, vous mesurez un peu le retard. En moyenne, de 1960 à l'an 2000, pour les champions de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, le Sénégal et la Côte d'Ivoire, le revenu réel par tête était de 1 300 $. Aujourd'hui, en 2023, il est de 1 600 pour le Sénégal et il est de 2 000 pour la Côte d'Ivoire. Au même moment, la Corée du Sud, qui était au même niveau que ces deux pays, plus le Cameroun et le Ghana en 1970, a un revenu réel par tête de 37 000 $. Ces informations permettent aussi de mesurer le retard et les efforts qu'il faut faire. Quelqu'un a parlé de l'industrialisation. Avec votre indulgence, je donne un exemple pour ce qui concerne l'Afrique et mon pays. Aujourd'hui, les pays asiatiques, on considère en général qu'ils ont commencé à décoller à un moment où le taux d'épargne était de 35% et le taux d'investissement de 5%. Nous, ce n'est que récemment, en Côte d'Ivoire, Sénégal, que nous avons aujourd'hui des taux d'épargne de l'ordre de 16-21% et un taux d'investissement pour la première fois de 35%. Bon, ceux qui sont pour le système diront qu'il y a une convergence. Moi, je ne crois pas aux convergences. Et enfin, monsieur le modérateur, sur la question de l'industrialisation, je rappelle que j'ai fait ma thèse de doctorat sur l'étude critique des stratégies de transition du sous-développement au développement, c'est-à-dire comment organiser la transition d'une économie à dominante agricole vers une économie à dominante industrielle. Et à ce moment-là, il a raison de soulever la question de l'énergie. Chez nos concurrents asiatiques, avec qui nous avons pris les starting blocks du même départ, aujourd'hui, la quantité d'énergie commerciale dans le secteur productif, elle est de 75%. Encore une fois, il y a les deux pays champions en Afrique de l'Ouest. Le Sénégal, je ne connais pas assez le Ghana, je sais que ça doit être au même niveau. La quantité, c'est important de retenir ça. La quantité d'énergie commerciale qui va dans le secteur productif est de 4%. Et la quantité d'énergie commerciale qui va dans les loisirs pour des pays qui sont classés premiers pour l'ensoleillement mondial est de 75%. En d'autres termes, notre énergie ne nous sert qu'à nous amuser. Je crois qu'il faut continuer à mettre la pression pour qu'on aille véritablement dans la même direction pour sortir nos pays dans la situation où nous sommes. Je termine par confirmer et soutenir ce qu'a dit M. le ministre aujourd'hui. Les paradigmes changent. L'ajustement structurel, Ndongo l'a dit, un de ses aspects, c'est d'avoir dépolitisé totalement nos sociétés. Jusqu'à récemment, nos jeunes ne pensaient qu'à être des titulaires de MBA, des jeunes cadres, comme ils disent à Dakar. Mais aujourd'hui, il y a un changement, une exigence de comprendre d'où nous sommes venus, qu'est-ce que nous voulons réellement pour l'avenir. Et les spécialistes, les intellectuels sont en train de s'ajuster et de ramener le débat à un niveau où la population comprenne. Parce que ce matin, Ndongo, j'ai passé la grande partie de ma vie en tant qu'économiste, économétrie, modélisation. Je crois que c'est une bonne chose aussi que nous sortions petit à petit de ces dérives techniciennes et parler de nos problèmes de manière simple pour que la population comprenne, que nous puissions nous accompagner mutuellement pour un sort meilleur. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, sir. Are you responding to the issue of urgency? Yes, go for it briefly.
Yes, this is direct answers to Honorable Adongo. He did mention the issue of urgency, and I think I support him on the issue of urgency. He also did mention that Parliament is not given enough time to be able to digest the document that is brought from the executive. Again, he has witnessed it, but I've witnessed it twice in opposition. So we understand that these things happen, and it alternates from government to government. Party A is in government, they'll do the same thing that they criticize Party B for not bringing the documents on time to Parliament. So again, I think either our parliamentary constitution or whatever it is should be able to come up with a standard to say that before a document is brought to Parliament, you should give us a working time of, let's say, 7 days, or a working time notice of 1 week, for example. I think this should go into the parliamentary system, which should be binding both the executive and then the legislature. So this is one solution. Again, maybe he didn't hear me right, and I'm his senior colleague. So I need to address it directly to him. he got up and it's like he's disappointed. And in trying to quote, probably he misstepped. I said here, and I'm repeating, that I said Parliament should be engaged and many more parliamentarians should be brought to such functions. I never said that Parliament is inadequate. So I wanted this to be very, very clear. Now he did mention that he wants solutions, and that is where the urgency he made is important. We thought we were going to discuss solutions, but time has taken us because of interjections. But to give him one point that I had, in terms of solutions, and from what we discussed today, which I learned from here, we were told that because of the single currency of the US, and because we all do our trade and payments in the US dollar, and also because we also service our debts in the US dollars, it keeps a lot of pressure on us. And therefore, if we could go for multi-currency, others even went high to talk of domestic currencies, which I did not yet agree to. But if it comes to multi-currency, what I was going to say the way forward was that African countries should start subscribing to the BRICS system. And therefore, if we subscribe and we join the BRICS system, then we'll have these multiple currencies available to us. So for example, China is doing a lot with Africa, 11% of the total credit comes to us. Russia is doing the same. So we could adopt the yuan and the ruble, and of course, our big brother, South Africa, the rand. And now that Saudi Arabia is involved, it means the real too would become important. So for me, this is one of my way forward, just to satisfy Honorable Adongo.
Thank you very much for that. I want to, because we are 2 minutes past our time, I want to invite Her Excellency to begin by giving us her closing thoughts as she comments on the issue.
Je crois que nous sommes en train de parler d'énormément de choses, mais les institutions ont leur importance. Mais franchement, les hommes et les femmes réels qui sont dans des situations inextricables aujourd'hui, faute de pouvoir d'achat, d'énormes difficultés d'accéder à la nourriture, à l'eau, à la santé, à l'éducation. Moi, je viens d'une région, le Sahel, où les gens, les chefs djihadistes, on parle de djihadisme, ils recrutent parce que l'État et les entreprises sont incapables de donner du travail et un salaire décent aux gens. Alors, quand nous parlons d'argent ici, parlons du réel. Que vivent les gens? Comment vivent les gens? Tout ce qui a été dit ici, quelle est la traduction quand on parle d'urgence dans les meilleurs délais au niveau des humains? Il s'agit des humains. Bon, toutes ces grandes idées, est-ce qu'on va pouvoir, disons, comment ils vont se les approprier et les amener à s'en imprégner, les amener à défier les décideurs politiques par rapport à tout ça? Parce que tout ça, ça reste une question d'entre-soi. Nous parlons entre nous, nous disons les mêmes choses d'une réunion à l'autre, mais maintenant, en quoi tout cela va mettre l'Afrique à l'abri des implosions qui ont commencé et qui risquent de continuer parce que les gens n'ont rien. Les gens n'ont rien et les gens n'en peuvent plus. Surtout les femmes. Les femmes sont obligées de colmater des brèches à longueur de temps. Il faut verser ces questions-là ici, les simplifier, nous doter d'outils de communication. Ça doit exister. Il doit exister des systèmes de communication qui permettent d'élargir la base de ce débat, de permettre aux gens de s'investir véritablement pour résoudre les questions au jour le jour et que ce soit seulement une question de réforme institutionnelle.
Thank you very much. We need to take this to the grassroots. That's the take home from Her Excellency. Jason, you want to give us your closing thoughts? Whoever goes first is fine.
All right, thank you very much. And I think that, let me just say that 3 days discussion having been in vain, useful lessons gotten from this particular conference so far. I think that time could have been more, like my brother Honorable Dongo mentioned. But the benefit of he being a representative or a member of parliament, ranking member, and being here means that an important aspect of the Ghanaian parliament is represented in this conference, and his views will work out. What I'm expecting of the organizers of this program is to give us, at the end of the day, a communique that highlights the takeaway points, something that will guide the government of Ghana and government of other West African or African countries are some of the blueprints, consensus points out of this particular conference. That said, for us, I mentioned that we need to ensure that we cap expenditure in Africa by putting in place legislation. That is first. And we can do that by offloading or onboarding private sector to take part of the development that government will take or public sector will take, so that government will be free of space to focus on irrelevant. Two, we will need to do something we call the tax reform in Africa, very major tax reform in Africa. And we have to look at case by case basis. And we need to control inflation by looking at the minute details of food in agriculture, of transportation, by talking of power sector. How do we make our power affordable for businesses? And lastly, we need to work on the exchange rate. We need to work, and that is where I support the ECO, or the West African Monetary Zone policy. So this, when we do, we'll at least have some handle on the economy. And once we have handle on the economy, I think that social spending, spending on human capital formation, as Dr. Mentioned yesterday, are all things that will come as given. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And allow me to stand on the agreement of my fellow speakers with the urgency that Hippolyte has referred to, and that has been exemplified by the message conveyed by the Honorable Member of Parliament, but to also suggest what policy options can also be adopted at the national level. A country like Ghana and many others that are going into restructuring negotiations with their creditors, facilitated by the International Monetary Fund. One policy option or one idea to make sure we do not pass on the cost of those restructuring to citizens is to ensure ring fencing of social expenditure, health, education, water, and sanitation. These are the big targets when it comes to any austerity measures, any fiscal consolidation program that is going to be imposed as part of any restructuring exercise. This is very critical. And I think my colleague Chenai raised the question in yesterday's session that fiscal consolidation is not just about money being redirected from investment in these social sectors, but when they talk about the public wage bill or public sector wage bill, teachers, doctors, nurses, they too are on that line when it comes to fiscal consolidation and austerity. So governments should ring fence that. Legislators, members of parliament, when they are receiving these documents, should ensure that these are protected sectors within these negotiations. So that's just one example at the national level. Another one could be strengthening of debt management and oversight institutions. Perhaps the establishment of autonomous or semi-autonomous debt management offices whose responsibilities are not restricted to just statistical exercises, but real rigorous analysis of what the debt situation actually is in our countries. At the regional level, let us work together. I think Suad, Jomo, Professor Olikushi, in his keynote on Wednesday, have talked about unity and unity of purpose. In the SADC region, the SADC Parliamentary Forum 2 years ago adopted a model public financial management law, which is a broad aspirational legal document that seeks to harmonize the way PFM is done in Southern Africa. It's not a prescriptive law, it is an aspirational one. So member states within SADC have the opportunity to pick out the elements of that law that are useful. Perhaps across the continent, in the East African community, in CEMAC, ECOWAS, and in Northern Africa, there are opportunities to learn from those lessons and look at what we can do there. At the continental level, the high-level panel on illicit financial flows that was chaired by His Excellency Thabo Mbeki has made a raft of solutions, recommendations that were unilaterally adopted by the African Union member states. These recommendations should be implemented by our countries. We have tried in the last few days to talk about the intersectionality of illicit financial flows, taxation, and the indebtedness. That is one recommendation that transfers right from the national level onto the continental level. One other thing with regards to at the continental level is the adoption of the protocols that call for the establishment of the African Union financial institutions, the African Central Bank, the African Investment Bank, and the African Monetary Fund through the African Monetary Institute. These are fundamental documents, fundamental protocols and treaties that create an African financial architecture that then gives the continent the muscle to negotiate away from the US dollar, the yuan, the ruble, whatever you, and bring it back into domestic currencies. And it makes that argument ever more stronger. And very lastly, at the global level, at the international level, the African group has been fundamental and energetic in pursuing reforming of the international financial architecture through the Framework Convention on Tax. The African countries and member states should not lose sight, not lose energy in ensuring that they see that process through. When it comes to issues of debt, that is the next frontier. There is a big conference that is taking place next year in Spain, which is the 4th Financing for Development conference, the follow-up from Addis Ababa that took place in 2015. The big agenda there for the continent should be on how do we get a process for discussing, reforming the international debt architecture in the same way that we have done for tax.
Yeah.
Those, I hope, are some of the critical or more fundamental suggestions that we can take right from the national into the international space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason, for taking us from the national through the continental up to the global level with concrete proposals there. Let me come to the two gentlemen here for your closing thoughts. Go first, sir.
Merci beaucoup. Moi, je vais terminer rapidement puisque nous avons été interpellés sur les solutions. Je vais parler d'un homme qui a fait sur le continent ce qu'aucun gouvernement, aucun chef d'État n'a fait pour le dialogue avec la société, pour le dialogue entre les Africains, pour le dialogue et la coopération pour le Sud. C'est Samir Amin. Samir a créé le Codesria. Jamais il n'y a eu sur ce continent des discussions, une coopération, une synergie aussi féconde entre scientifiques et penseurs du Cap au Caire. Le Codesria a 50 ans aujourd'hui. ENDA rayonne sur toute la planète. ENDA, dans les pays où il est fait un travail de fond dans la population à la base, en termes de formation, de plaidoyer pour le monde rural, de plaidoyer pour les femmes. Il y a le Third World Forum, le forum du tiers-monde que je dirige depuis le décès de Samir. Nous avons 5 bureaux régionaux. Nous dialoguons entre Africains et Asiatiques. Il y a un bureau Europe, il y a un bureau Chine, en Chine, il y a un bureau Amérique latine. Et enfin, il y a l'IDEP. Ce sont les réformes dès la création de l'IDEP apportées par Samir Amin qui ont permis, depuis une 50aine d'années, de former tous les spécialistes en matière de développement économique et social. Alors, voilà, en termes d'action concrète, ce qu'il est possible pour les intellectuels de faire là où ils ont une marge de manœuvre. Voilà sur quoi je voulais terminer. Je pense que la voie, c'est la vérité, même en termes de financement. Il nous faut sortir de certaines logiques, ou en tout cas faire du 50-50. Le financement par la fiscalité. C'est simple. Par exemple, je prends mon pays, Sénégal, économiste. Jamais dans les documents du Sénégal, j'ai vu un document de stratégie de mobilisation des ressources internes. Jamais. Il a existé depuis 5 ans un document de stratégie de mobilisation des ressources pour le secteur agricole et c'est moi qui ai fait cette étude. Il n'y en a pas d'autres. Ça doit être pareil pour beaucoup d'autres pays. Je crois que donc, voilà des modèles. La création de champions. Il y a des pays africains qui nous inspirent. Et il y a d'autres aspects. Donc, que je ne vais pas développer ici. En tout cas, je vous remercie encore une fois de nous avoir associés à ce travail et j'espère que nos réflexions vont se poursuivre. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. Let's get our final closing thoughts here. Honorable.
Oh, well, I would say that we'll commend the organizers, and I think that this was a fruitful discussion. And then next time, let's consider extending the time for the policy discussion. And I hope Honorable Adongo would be there next time, sitting this time as Minister of Finance on the panel discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's appreciate the panelists for their thoughts and the insights and the interventions. I would like to usher you back to your seats as I usher us into the closing session, which will be handled shortly. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Yeah, just to read.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, our conference is drawing to a close. On behalf of Charles Abu Gray, Executive Director of Ideas, I would like to say a few words of thanks. I would have liked to have Shandu here again next to me, but he preferred to be over there. So thanks first to our partners for this event, the government of Ghana and its representatives, Afrodat, represented here by Jason Braganza and many of his colleagues. Thanks also to our distinguished guests who made the trip despite their complicated agendas, to Jose Antonio Ocampo, Aminata Traoré, Jan Kregel, Olukoshi Adebayo, Hippolyte Fofak, Yufen Lee. We are grateful to you all for being with us in Accra and for sharing your thoughts with us all. CP Chandra Seha, Jomo Kwame Sundaram, and Dodi Sikata contributed to the success of this conference through their personal involvement in drafting the concept notes and agendas of the series of events during this week, the mobilization of their networks and their speeches as panelists and chairs. A special thought for Jayati Ghosh, who was unable to be physically with us in Accra for reasons beyond her control. We had 4 days of intense reflections and promising debates. Ahead of the conference on March 26, we had a high-level roundtable on the recent developments in the CFA zone and its likely implications for the future of African economic integration. This event has been an opportunity to launch the Afreximbank special issue on the topic. Thanks to Hippolyte Fofak for having coordinated this very important work and contribution to the African Liberation Project. Thanks to Dr. Amara Enya for having facilitated this discussion. During this conference, 30 speakers coming from all over the world have shared their inputs, insights, and policy recommendations on how to end debt crisis in Africa and the Global South, and what kind of reforms at the global scale would be needed to that end. The first day set the tone by providing insights into the domestic and international political economy of sovereign debt management and restructuring, as well as the differences between past and present experience of indebtedness cycles. The obstacles to a rational, orderly, and holistic restructuring international mechanism for external sovereign debt crisis have been largely discussed in the same vein as the limitations of the IMF's debt sustainability analysis and the mainstream economics assumptions that underlie them. One of the key features of this gathering has been the wealth of national experiences about debt-related issues that have been discussed. We were lucky to have a glimpse of the drivers and manifestations of debt distress and possible solutions to it in various national contexts across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. From the different diagnoses, various speakers have suggested a number of policy proposals aiming at reforming the international financial and tax system, but also at intellectually and institutionally empowering African policymakers. A report synthesizing the main tenets and results of the conference will be shared with you in the coming days. Please note that the various case studies and economic policy proposals discussed over the 3 days are already available in the form of a first draft. They will be published in the coming months and will be freely accessible. We encourage journalists, civil society organizations, students, policymakers, etc., to regularly visit our website for updates and eventually subscribe to our newsletter. The conference has been live streamed on the website and YouTube account of Ideas, so you will be able to easily find and download the videos of the different events since last Monday on our website. Fortunately, the productive discussions we have had here will do much to strengthen Ideas research and policy work agenda. Together, Ideas with Perry Political Economy Research Institute of Amherst University, Massachusetts, Ideas will be organizing a workshop on debt and climate justice from May 3rd to May 5th, 2024. This event will be followed by an international conference in Bamako at the end of May on the political and economic perspective on Saharan countries in West Africa. In August 2024, as a prelude to the G20 summit in Rio, Ideas will be hosting a conference dedicated on the proposals to reform the international financial and tax system. At the end of October 2024, Ideas will be preparing the 3rd edition of Africa's Economic and Monetary Sovereignty Conference in collaboration with Suad Aden Osman and the Coalition for Dialogue on Africa. As a prelude to this conference, we organized a 2-day training workshop for young scholars entitled Introductory Course on Public Finance, Debt, and the International Financial Architecture. The workshop brought together master's and PhD students from all over Ghana, as well as from the rest of the continent and its diaspora. Some female students came from Nigeria by bus, a vivid sign of the enthusiasm shown by students that invites Ideas to do more efforts in this direction. This is the first training program organized on African soil by Ideas since the establishment last February of the scientific board of the Ideas African Network. This important institutional development within Ideas has been possible thanks to a number of colleagues and friends, including Godwin Murunga, the executive director of Codestia, and Howard Stern. This workshop for young scholars would not have been possible without the cooperation of the Department of Economics at the University of Ghana and the coordination and supervision of the indefatigable Professor Abena Oduro. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the colleagues who, despite their busy schedules, agreed to give lectures. Many thanks to C.P. Chandrasekhar, Howard Stern, Emmanuel Kojo, Ailan Karikarma, Crystal Simeoni, Jason Braganza, Charles Ofori. Our colleague Vikas Rawal, who coordinates the Ideas Certificate Program, has done a titanic job of providing students and the general public with an interactive and highly intuitive database on the external debt of developing countries. A large number of indicators are available over long periods. Users can easily download the indicators and graphs of interest to them. I invite you all to visit the website and to share the link with the relevant targets, students, journalists, civil society organizations, policymakers, etc. We welcome all feedback. Before concluding my speech, I would like, on behalf of Ideas, to express my thanks to all the participants. This includes the representatives of Ghana's political parties who agreed to debate with each other as part of an Ideas Roundtable. No international event could be successful and far-reaching absent translators and journalists. So we convey our gratitude to the team of interprets, Ghanaian journalists, and their African counterparts who traveled long distances to be with us. No work is perfect. However, we hope you enjoyed being in Accra. In any case, Ideas African Network colleagues work hard to make you as comfortable as possible and to facilitate the communication around this event. So thanks to Anil Kumar Mani, Ambika Subhash, Florencia Pizzo, Adam Hudu, CJ Abakwam Clara, Ache Nondomo, Bishop Akolgo, and Amponsa. Special thanks to Akonudake and his team at Heritage Development for their professionalism. I can't conclude without paying tribute to Charles Abugre, Ideas Executive Director. Charles worked very hard to make this event a success. Unfortunately, the passing away of his mother a few days before the start of the conference prevented him from being with us. We have missed his dynamism, humor, and relaxed attitude over the last few days. I would like to offer him our sincere condolences and solidarity at this difficult time. Let's hope he will be back soon to continue guiding the smooth running of Ideas. Once again, thank you all for the honor of having accepted our invitation. Have safe travels back home, and thank you all very much.